Hey guys, it's me, Stormie, and since there's been so much Saturn conversation, I figured we'd go ahead and cover the Saturn signs. Now, the Saturn sign placement in your chart, it challenges us, right? It makes us grow. It makes us mature. Saturn is the taskmaster. He says, nope, you've got to grow up, you've got to get it done, and you've got to come up a little bit from where you were. So that said, we know that Saturn poses limitations, restrictions, delays, even issues with authority is very much so seen in this placement. So, and I think about it in terms of my children, because it's very much so the parent-child relationship where, you know, if you've ever heard a parent say, well, I'm doing this for your own good, that is exactly what Saturn is about. Saturn is to keep us on that straight and narrow because it's genuinely what we need to outgrow to develop at a soul level. I mean, you know, everybody's got Saturn stuff to work on. So that alone lets you know people are not perfect. But it also gives some space to understand what people are working in, I think, when you understand a Saturn placement. Now, the way Saturn works to do this in our lives is practice, practice, practice. It's repetition. I mean, Saturn is a 100% a believer of the school of hard knocks and practical experience, showing us, right? There's not really a better way to learn things than having to go through it, bonk your head enough times, be like, God, I don't like the outcome of what's happening when I do that, before you're going to stop and let it go. It is the very condition of being human and having human nature to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. Saturn comes in so that we can start realizing those results aren't working anymore. Now, for some of us, these are very deep. I mean, your Saturn issues are not cute. It's not like, oh, I drink too much coffee. Okay, that might be in there. But maybe you drink too much coffee to overcome a feeling of lack. That's what it's always about. It's pointing us to the things that we've got to overcome at a soul level to work on. And this can be feelings of being less than, being better than, even being ridiculed and embarrassed by some of our behaviors and decisions and things like that. I mean, these are deep level things that are not always even comfortable to talk about, and that many people spend a lot of time covering up the truth and lying to kind of just smooth it over. But the Saturn issues are real. Now, that said, Saturn takes about 30 years, and I say about because sometimes it's really 31, just depending, okay? Sometimes it's 29. To come back to the place it was when you were born. So that said, you can generally tell just in society a difference between a 30-year-old and a 15-year-old, right? Or even a 30-year-old and many 20-year-olds. And you can also tell another difference between a 30-year-old and a 60-year-old, not just in the body, but a lot of times in lessons that they have learned. Even if you have a 60-year-old Sagittarius who's very freedom-willed and very playful still and all of that good stuff, they usually have some wisdom to say, you know what, this is what I did when I had this experience. So you can tell that this is a difference. So the Saturn cycle comes in about 30-year increments, and you're really working on developing into the next area of your life. And this is great because when we see a person go through several Saturn cycles, right? Even their first one coming to 30, that's usually where you see big decisions being made, right? Big changes being made that are like, oh, for whatever reason, I'm just not into some of that stuff I was into before. I need to go this way, right? That's why in the 30s, it kind of looks that way. But again, we see it, and we see when Saturn comes back to about the time where your natal Saturn was at, people will have a midlife crisis. They're like, oh my gosh, I'm 60. What am I doing with my life? Oh, I really have to do this. And they're kind of reaching and grabbing. And Saturn is infamous for that because when it comes back into that placement, it's kind of like, whoa, am I young? Am I older? Am I, what's happening? So if you're feeling that way, this is Saturn work as well. Now, depending on your disposition, you can see Saturn as a negative. And I do not like when people see Saturn as a negative. Saturn comes to ground and to mature and to be a helper. But of course, it does it by pushing us to have to actually do the work, right? We have to actually grow up and put forth effort and not have it be all about us. And we have to be more service and humble-minded. And that's very, very hard in the human condition. That's what makes this journey as a human so hard. Now, a lot of times too, we can see Saturn positions and dispositions in our society. People in government often have this. Dictators definitely have heavy Saturn placement, heavy Saturn energy, things like that. So, you know, when we look around the world and we see people and they're like, gosh, they must have a lot of Saturn in their chart, you can usually tell these people, they don't have a generally huge sense of humor. They are very, let's get it done, and we're getting it done this way. They're authority figures, you know what I mean? And so one of the things that we want to work on when somebody has a heavy Saturn disposition is we want to find out where their Jupiter's at, because these two balance each other. Jupiter, if it's in excess, makes us way too optimistic, right? Where it's like, oh, it doesn't matter, my house is on fire, I'm burning wood and it's good, or something like that. You know what I mean? It's just completely ridiculous. Whereas Saturn's like, your house is on fire, put it out. You know what I mean? So when somebody has an excessive Saturn, we want to look to their Jupiter to balance that out. And when somebody has excessive Jupiter, we want to look to their Saturn to balance these out so that we can get a more grounded person who's still vibrant and optimistic and just beautiful. But remember, we come into the human experience like anything else because we have some lessons we would like to learn in a human form. So if you'd like to know a little bit more about your own Saturn placement, go ahead and keep watching, or click the box down below to find your exact Saturn sign. People who have the Saturn in Aries placement tend to have some really delayed opportunities, delayed ambition. And what I mean is that generally these people have had to take on and start making decisions usually very young in their life, or very quickly, and become responsible for other people very quickly, or just have a big weight of responsibility when they're very young. And so that, of course, changes life. It provides, I don't want to say stumbling blocks, but definitely some roadblocks or delays in them, you know, just going a traditional grow and be ambitious kind of route. It really does slow it down for a second. And so what this also creates in them generally is a type of bitterness and anger that lies there as well. And so they must be mindful of that, because anger can very much so be an issue for this placement, because they've been dealing with so much. And the other thing that really adds fuel to that fire is that generally the sign is, I mean, people think that they have got it together, or this placement, they think they've got it together. They're cool, they're calm, collected, they make responsible decisions, you know, A, B, C, and D. Really, what's happening under the surface generally is that they lack a whole bunch of self-confidence, and then they have to make up for it by having a good persona, you know, looking good in the community, looking like they have it all together. And really, when you get with them, you find out that these are not really risk takers, because they'd much rather actually be quiet and not have to be responsible all the time. But then what happens, though, to balance it out in the outside world, is people see them not being very risky, right? Or just kind of being a little bit more tame, and they're like, they perceive that the world perceives them as being weak. Very Aryan type of energy and belief system right there. So then they jump off into these risks or these ideas or these gambles that are completely foolish, where you're like, why would you do that? But it's all an attempt to persuade their own perception of what they think people outside of them believe. It's really, really interesting. One thing with this placement that is very, very important is that because it is Saturn, the grounder, the maturity sign in Aries, ruled by the head, is these people have really got to take very good care of their facial area. You know what I mean? They have got to make sure they're working out, that they're staying active and moving their body so they don't have issues of circulation, so they don't have congestion, so they don't have issues with their eyes, things like that. It's really about keeping the body very, very healthy. As well, this is a placement that, yes, everybody needs to drink a lot of water and stay hydrated. Absolutely. This placement really needs it as well, because they could suffer from issues with the kidneys. And so you really want to be preventative if you do have this sign placement. And really the big overall lesson of this placement is they have to decide which things are really, really worth it. You know what I mean? Like, are you going to go forward in that, or are you not going to go forward in that? Because one does not decide your value or the other. It's about what you do when you're in any of the choices that you make, okay? And they also have to understand that they don't have to have issue with authority, because if they're in school or job or something like that, they can really have issues with people who are above them, because again, they perceive that they are less than. This is very much so the overcoming that has to be done with this placement. Some overcompensate in all kinds of ways. So really the overall lesson is learning the value, taking on the things that are genuinely authentic to them, that deserve their work and attention. As well though, when they can do that, when they kind of come more into this Saturn balance, it is beautiful because these people are just the right amount of Aries impulsive paired with that Saturn grounding. So if that is a placement that you have in your chart, that's a little bit about what this placement is working and growing through. People with the Saturn in Taurus placement have that genuine, deep need to feel security. That's financially, emotionally, spiritually, emotionally, all of those places. They feel like they need to be very secure there. So that said, they try and have kind of a tight grip over everything in their daily routine. The thing is about this placement is generally when we see it, this is a super hard working placement and they're glad to do the work, especially if there's some really yummy goal and compensation at the end of it. But pretty much nothing that these people do comes easy. They have to work for absolutely everything, and that is just typical of this placement. There has to be real live effort put into everything that they do, and it's great though because they do have the willingness to do that work. This is what makes them fantastic in business. It also makes them, they can be okay in politics and government, and some of them can be really okay in art if they are artsy, first of all, if they really have the inclination towards it, and if they are willing to understand all businesses of all aspects of that business, not just, I don't just paint, right? Like I have to be able to paint. I have to be able to understand how to sell it. I have to be able to understand how to market it. When it can come like that, they usually package this together just amazingly well. Now, another issue that grows in this placement is this idea of unconditional love. Many times people will try to just really love this sign, really give to them and love them, just love them as they are, right? And they have such a hard time with that because they don't understand. They feel like when you give something, you should receive compensation for it, right? Like you should be getting something back. And that is them as well. They have a harder time just giving freely of themselves, especially if the Saturn placement is young or underdeveloped. They feel like I loved you, you should be giving me something. Flowers, they really like flowers and food. They will totally accept that as compensation. So as this develops and becomes more mature, you can find that these people are able to give without expecting so much in return. That said, this is the other part of this placement is that they love stuff. They can almost be super possessive and really gather things to them and hold tight to them. And then when it's time to like sell stuff because they have to move and they have too much stuff, they either completely overvalue the things that they have or completely undervalue it. It's crazy. There's not, and if it's out of whack and it's not developed, there's just no middle place here. And because there's no middle place, they tend to have a really hard time with the gray area of things if they're underdeveloped. It's either this way or it's this way, very black and white. Now, what's funny though, is that even when this gets a little bit better developed, this, because remember, the Saturn is about it's about outgrowing the issues of this placement that it's teaching us to learn, the lessons, is that when they become more developed, they can really have this sense of, I don't need so much stuff, I don't need so much money, I need just a place to live, a spot to call my own, and enough money to handle what I need to handle, right? All at the same time, it will be a continued process of work because they're like, I just need like $5. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my $5. Like this fear of losing the things that they have is very, very real. Now, they can also be in true Taurus nature, very stubborn, very jealous, and they have endurance. So they can be stubborn with you for a very long time. They can be jealous of you or at you for a very long time. So that is another lesson that they're looking to overgrow and to outgrow. Now, when it comes to the body of this Saturn placement, because Saturn absolutely affects the body, the people with this placement generally have to watch out for things with the throat, the ears, and the nose, but mostly the throat. Here is really a place where even in terms of just that chakra energy, they can really feel blocked in things that they need to say as they're growing and maturing in this placement. So it's like there's a hand around the throat. It can very much so feel like that. So if you have this sign placement, that's a little bit about what you're working on, where you're working to outgrow, and kind of what that placement is about. People who hold the Saturn and Gemini placement tend to be highly organized. They adapt to situations usually very easily. You know what I mean? They can like gather a little bit of information about what's going on and really jump into the situation and begin being productive. You know, like they're not just generally, they're actually not wallflowers or anything like that. They take a little bit of information and get going with what they're doing. These people tend to be amazing with math or science, or they have an aptitude towards it. And they are systematic, they're methodical, and they are logical. Now, what's interesting about this placement as well is that it's so much with the communication with Gemini, but they're the hard lessons brought by Saturn. So this placement, typically there's some type of learning disability that is here because they have a hard time learning lessons. It may take them practice upon practice upon practice or exposure upon exposure before they get it. But once they get it, they usually do. But this is a placement of learning disabilities. And sometimes the disability comes with physical issues of the throat or issues of the lungs. I have often seen this placement be where the person has a lot to say, but they can't get it out clearly. And they're those people who they're trying to say so much that they can't breathe. They're like, you know what I mean? Like it kind of comes out like that. And so this is something they are learning to work to overcome. Now, on the other side too, what is really interesting about this is they tend to be very serious. These are generally very serious people. They have a lot of new ideas popping into their head all the time. New ways we could do it, new ways we could do this, which is funny because they don't generally like to do things in a new way. So it's very interesting the way the airiness comes together with the grounding of Saturn. Now, some of the other issues they really are working to grow to overcome with this placement are being isolated, feeling alone, lacking faith in their own ability to do things. Sometimes this placement can really have a hard time connecting with family members or those that are close to us. It's like there's just a gap in the connection of how that's happening. On a very physical level, like I said, sometimes the throat, they can have issues here or it's afflicted or something like that, consistent strep throat, things like that. Not the same as Taurus, but it can very much so be there. And issues of the lungs. So in this placement, they really want to learn that challenges are about overcoming and going through them, not going around them. So that's a little bit about the Saturn placement in Gemini. So people who have the Saturn in Cancer placement are really people who are working through especially if it's not nourished and matured yet, past issues, because they may have home, family, those kinds of things are so incredibly important to them, but they may not demonstrate emotionally a connectivity to that very well because these placements are usually dealing with having that sense of undernourishment or a lack of reassuredness in the emotional, physical, and mental department when they were children. Whenever we deal with Cancer, we can very much so look back to the ties of childhood. So it's so important for this sign to really have an established sense of self and self-confidence. And this comes through work, through having to get out there and put themselves out there and tell people the things that they felt like they lacked in their childhood and heal that childhood or that child within in order to move forward. Because this sign placement is very, very prone to depression, especially if it is not matured yet. If healing hasn't happened, they're prone to depression. They're prey to fear. They're prey to being clingy. Because it's really interesting with this placement too, they really hate to depend on other people or to say that they need help, but everything in them needs to know and needs to have a lot of assurance that they are loved and that they are secure and that they are taken care of. So they really, when you start to see this placement mature, they see these great strides in self-confidence, in worthiness and things like that. So they really start to come up. Now on a very physical level, they tend to have issues of in their chest, in this chest heart area, that heart chakra area, breasts, huge issue for many, many people with this sign placement, and stomach issues. And that's because, you know, they take on these emotional, mental, spiritual blockages like hypersensitivity, feeling insufficient as a person, less than, all of these things, and they create these ailments within the body. So one thing I definitely recommend when I see this placement specifically in a chart is that there are lots of scans or lots of attention placed on breast cancers, breast issues, things like that, even for the males. So like I said, when this sign placement gets more mature, man, you get to see these be some of the most beautifully self-confident, developed people, and no longer having to spend the daily battle working through being less than. So that's a little bit about this sign placement of Saturn in Cancer. So people who have the Saturn in Leo placement, this is very Leo kind of work, and then Saturn just amplifies it. So this is the work of finding grounding in humility, also finding value within themselves. The people with this placement can have extravagant plans and ideas and be very well gifted to go forward and pursue them, but they undermine that by being in a position of feeling like they are less than others, or they're so afraid of being emotionally burned that they kind of have a coolness or a coldness or a detachedness from other people, and that is because they're really trying to put that that shell up to protect themselves. So a big set of lessons that you're learning with the Saturn and Leo placement is your own value and the belief that it's real right now, and you don't need any flair, you don't need anything to make it so that you're valuable. You already are, as well as cooperation with other people, because cooperating in a group can be very hard for this placement, or it can be something that they do and they suit up and they show up, but they don't really like it, which is a strange thing because they need so much reassurance that they're loved and they're accepted and all of these things, but yet they don't really like people. So this is a really interesting placement. And with this placement, I think it is very much so a karmic thing that the physical body where they can suffer is, of course, in issues of circulation and things like that. But all of the places that we derive strength from and we derive a need for being affectionate with so that we can keep rolling, and that is issues of the heart. This placement very much so could be prone to a history of heart disease, or they could carry heart disease issues or lots of heartache, as well as the spine and the back. So if you do have this placement, understand that one of the things you are working towards in this lifetime is that cooperation with others, a genuine humility that comes from a belief that you are already perfect just the way that you are. All right, thanks, guys. So people with their Saturn in Virgo placement can be very detail-oriented, very analytical, almost to the point, though, with this Saturn energy here of being obsessive about it. And this is a sign placement, too, where we can also see a different set of learning disabilities coming about. And it is generally because with this placement, they can be so hyper-focused on one thing and all of the details and have all of their attention on that they really have a hard time learning other things. And it is just the general makeup of what this placement is like. And so they can be distracted by all of these other things, which kind of stinks because they're so creative and they're so talented. But until this sign placement is a little bit more matured, you don't actually get to see the creative and beautiful side of what this sign placement actually has to offer. So the big full lesson that Saturn in Virgo has to learn is about discernment, discrimination, choosing, which thing is the most important to put your energy into. You can't focus on it all, and you can't hyper focus on one thing and all of its details. You have to figure out which things actually need your attention and be able to provide it to all of those things. Another really hard thing that this placement is trying to outgrow, that again works into that discernment, is they need to be able to control their environment. And once you see this sign hit maturity, and you can see that that's developed, then you get to see them be highly creative. They have some great ideas. And before it's developed as well, you can see these people being very serious. They're not very funny, but once they mature a little bit more, they do get to have a lot more humor in it. Now, bodily, some of the issues and the issue placements that this sign will work against are things in the abdominal area, especially the intestines. I mean, they're so stressed out and analysis paralysis about figuring out something to an obsessive point that it really centers right in their solar plexus area, right in that, who am I? What am I worth? All of those kind of central questions that lie right down there in that tummy area. All right, guys, thanks. So people with the Saturn in Libra placement, these people generally, when you see them, they are very Libra-esque. You know, they're intelligent, they're usually beautiful, they're fair, they're just, they're diplomatic. They tend to cooperate instead of, you know, trying to go against the grain, very much so, which is interesting that they have the Saturn in a natural partnership sector, because one of the biggest issues they face and have to work through in this lifetime is an inferiority complex when it comes to relationships. Now, these are the people you can see them be completely confident in every other area of their life, and you just think, wow, they've got it together. But then when it comes to a relationship, they feel very inferior or unlovable for some reason. So as people are trying to get to know them, they may actually be pushing them away because of that belief that they are unlovable or something about them is not lovable enough. So it's genuine work that they are going to do, which is funny because they generally really crave a very solid relationship. With this sign placement, you can typically see that marriage and relationships really are work. They have to actually put in the work to make them work, more so than like a normal relationship, because they really are conquering themselves. Now, body-wise, when we see issues in this sign placement, it typically has to do with the kidneys, the lower back, things like that. So you can see them hold anxiety or hold weight or hold stress or something like that in these areas. Now, what's great is when you see this mature and you see it in balance, Saturn really grounds these Libra-esque qualities, and they can be wonderfully confident and comfortable in a relationship, and they can be wonderful to just have a conversation with about relationships. They're very insightful from that place of lack there and feeling like they lack in a relationship. They have so much to add to actually helping people be loving to each other. As well, this sign placement is generally very, very artistic. All right, guys, see you in the next one. People with the Saturn in Scorpio placement are doing some real work. I mean, this placement is generally very impatient. They are not about to slow down and just take it easy. That is not who they are about. So it can make them hypercritical and overpowering to other people who they're working with as well, because they're so intense that they're going to get to the goal and you better be on board to get with it as well. Now, with this sign placement, I say that this is one of the tougher ones because you are really going to have to struggle through some things while you mature in this, because it is only through experience, especially with this sign placement. They don't generally learn from the wisdom of others. They have to go through it, because this sign placement can be very jealous. They can be resentful. They can be possessive. They can be cunning. They can be manipulative. And those are some heavy things to be working through. But this sign placement usually has the other support of other planetary placements to help them do this work. They can be very secretive about how they feel. And once they are hurt in this sign placement, it's unforgiving. You know what I mean? Now, when you see the sign come into balance, see it come into maturity, you get to see them actually walking through some of the drama, realizing what part they had in it, and being able to begin letting it go so that they can stop the cycle of the drama and bring in some healing. And it's crazy. They're so afraid of emotional or personal rejection that they overcompensate in all kinds of ways. And then it later, generally, more times than not, turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy of failure. So when you really get to see this come into maturity, this is a maturity placement that when it happens, I'm really so genuinely excited for the other person, because this is a lot of deep work. Now, on the body, where they can tend to suffer with are the issues of the reproductive organs, giving birth to new ideas, not having control of what goes on down there, as well as elimination organs, bowel movements, bowel obstructions, bowel issues are huge in this placement. Even if it's just an irritation or something going on, or later in life if they have bowel issues, super prominent here too, but it's all about that letting go, and they're not really prone to letting go of power control even within their own bodies. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next placement. So people with the placement of Saturn in Sagittarius, these are fun people. They really are. They are fun. They are fun-loving. They are typically attracted to gambling or things that are like they're that game of chance, you know what I mean, or activities of chance, because they really just want to go see what's on the other side, which is a very Sagittarian quality. The other thing is that they really do, because they're like that. They enjoy adventure. They enjoy excitement. They enjoy these kinds of things. Now, where the real Saturn work comes in for this placement is that generally someplace, usually early in life or in their life, they were not able to have a particularly formal education or a specific type of education, so they're very self-taught. So appearance and achieving through having knowledge and information is a huge thing for them, but it can create tunnel vision, right? Where they just become so sure that they are the only ones who know anything about this subject, that everybody else, to include the people who they studied when they were learning, they're idiots and they don't know anything, right? And because of that, that could also make them so logical that they actually miss out in the fun and excitement. It's really interesting to watch this placement. Now, when we watch this placement kind of grow and mature as well, what we get to see is they become more open. They become open to power and authority, and they believe that other people may know a thing or two as well. They have a strong intuition that they can generally be guided by, but when they're not mature enough, or when it's out of balance, it's completely out of whack. These people also can keep themselves in this little box of fear because they do fear authority. They feel like, if I don't live on the straight and narrow and I don't live by this path, even though they're completely generally non-traditional people in the big scheme of things, if they don't do it this way, they're going to be punished. And so they have to. So they can literally scare themselves into a set of living that's really not established by anybody but themselves, because they can create delusions left and right. Now, people in the physical body with this placement, they can suffer from issues with their hips, with the muscles, with nerves, with sciatica, liver. The liver can be really, really a problem area here too. It is very important that whatever your sun sign and your other planet placements, if you do have a Saturn and Sagittarius placement, exercise is really going to be key for you, and stepping out of your shell every here and there to see what happens if you break the rules. All right, guys, see you soon. People with the Saturn in Capricorn placement are ambitious. They are driven. They are set out to achieve their goals, especially in their career and in their finances. I mean, you can always see these people working hard. Now, the issues come in is that you generally see them working very, very hard, of course, not an issue, but they have a hard time delegating because they just are not sure that other people can produce, the type of product that they could really produce if they did it themselves. So you often see them doing most of the work and not delegating, sometimes to the point where it makes people mad, where they're like, why am I even here? Those kinds of questions. We've all worked with the Saturn in Capricorn, and if you haven't, you really should. Now, this is the thing, because they are so head set on getting to where they're going to get. They have a lot of self-discipline. It may take them forever to get where they're going to get, but they have got the tenacity to do it. They've got the patience, they've got the perseverance, and they are going to stay on that self-discipline track until they arrive. Now, the other thing about this placement is that they care a lot about what people think. So that's one of the other reasons that if they were to really examine their motives, and they're so hardworking and they're always working, if they were to look at another piece of why they're doing that truly at a core level, it's because they care that people think that they're a hard worker. And also, if they're doing most of the work, it gives them the opportunity to control their environment. You know what I mean? It's that I've got to control my environment before my environment controls me. And it's a very ground in fear for this sign placement to be out of control, or to have somebody else telling them what to do. They don't really like that. This sign placement, a really big thing they have to grow through and grow into an understanding and a maturity with, is learning to respect authority, learning to respect the power that they do achieve, because they often do achieve some significant stance in their communities and their lives or families, and also to appreciate and understand the spirituality behind money as well. Now, in the body, they can tend to have issues with the skeletal system, their bones. You know what I mean? I mean, they're literally working themselves to the bone. No wonder that they have those issues, right? Knees. Yep, these people are not afraid to get on the floor and scrub it. They don't want a Swiffer. They want to get on the floor and scrub it so that it's done right. And the skin. They got to be a little bit tougher skin, because the world's really not thinking about them as much as they think that they are. So they got to toughen up. All right, guys, I'll see you in the next placement. People who hold the Saturn in Aquarius placement, these people, they're inventive, they're original, they have amazing scientific minds. It is really generally not easy for this sign placement to make friends with people, but by goodness, when they get one, they're like the best friend ever. They're loyal, they're dedicated. And it's funny because these people can really see, like, they're so future minded. You know what I mean? This is our future minded, save humanity sign anyways, and then Saturn is grounding the placement, but they can really see the future as like, oh my God, we're all going to die, it's all going to end. Meanwhile, they're all completely set up to try and help humanity be different, try and help humanity survive and have the next innovation that actually brings us all together, which is another really funny thing about this, because they are all about, let's bring it together, let's get it together, but they're such loners. So the real work here, some of it for this sign placement, is Saturn grounding, and Saturn comes to say you need to tell the truth, because most Aquarians with this placement and Aquarians in general are loners, but they're lonely as well. They're so different and so unique and eccentric and have their own way of expressing things, and they have this huge superiority complex that they are left on their own, but they really crave being a part of a group. They just can't seem to make it fit. You know, square peg, round hole is generally what this is like. But what they really don't realize is that there's lots of square peg holes out there. So they have to work to find them, and they don't really enjoy doing that. Now, when this placement is mature and it's in balance, oh my gosh, we get some of the greatest humanitarians in the world, or ideas for communities, ideas for your household, because they do need structure. They need structure and discipline, but it's going to be unconventional. You know what I mean? This may be the sign placement where you see them teaching their children about spirituality through dancing, through looking at flowers, through holding them, through all sorts of really interesting practices that you wouldn't necessarily find in a traditional church or synagogue or temple to pray in, but they are teaching the exact same things. They just can't do it along conventional lines. So it is really critically important for this sign placement to learn to work with people, to get out there, to get in there, to be seen and to see other people, because they can be cold, they can be opinionated, and they can also be very resentful if they try and do that dance of I'm in and I'm out, or I want to be a part of the group, but I feel like I don't fit. They'll really have that loner mentality. Now, physically on the body, the areas that they have to be careful of are the nervous system. They definitely have to watch this because they can be overstimulated or have issues that cause numbness in pieces of the body. Oftentimes I'll hear with people with this placement, when they have that, they'll have something go numb and they can really realize what it's connected to what they're doing in their life. The other part of that is that their hearts can really be affected as well. And they can have issues in their circulatory system, like blockages. You know what I mean? Things slowing things down, things that could be critical to obviously being alive. If you have a blood clot in your heart, that's not going to work out very well for most of us. So that's a little bit about this sign placement, and I'll see you guys in the Saturn and Pisces placement. People with the Saturn in Pisces placement, these are our martyrs. You know what I mean? They are like, they can feel like they are just giving up their whole lives for the cause, but they really want us to know about it. You know what I mean? They can generally feel like victims or feel extra vulnerable. And for such a highly attuned psychic sign, they really can see more of the negative than the positive. So some real work that they have to grow in doing is learning to put this Saturn placement into positive perspective so that they can use that psychic sense. Because once they can tap into it, it's absolutely incredible. These people make amazing medical people, social workers, teachers, religious leaders, religious teachers, things like that, because they really can get down into the compassion of it. And that is one way that Saturn comes along and really grounds down this overly martyrous placement. Now, some real growth, maturity stuff that they're working on in this placement is to grow in emotional confidence, because they can often feel like they don't have enough confidence. They have this great, amazing, maybe even stuff from a dimension to a different dimension to share, but they don't feel confident enough, so they don't share it. So then we all miss out. So learning to grow in confidence and acceptance of their own gifts and their own makeup is a real work for this sign or for this planet placement. Now, physically in the body, they can deal with difficulties and issues in their feet. Feet pain, heel pain, plantar fasciitis. This is stuff that happens here. And isn't that so? The way we stand on our feet or the way we use our lower limbs or how we feel about those things can really speak to the confidence that we have in our lives as well. Just along with that, the lymphatic system. They have a problem letting go of things. They have a problem flushing things pretty generally. They hold on to issues from the past much longer than they need to, but it's because they're still hurt. And if they haven't dug in to actually get to the healing, they can really suffer from issues of that. And what they generally don't realize is they think it's one problem in the body or one problem in their life, and they don't realize based on the lymphatic system that their bodies are just weaker than they're ever giving it credit for while they're demanding a lot of stress from it. So being mindful about this, and I always recommend for this sign placement, I don't care what the rest of the chart says, I always recommend for this sign placement, lots of lymphatic draining massages, even self-massages. All right, guys, that's all about the Saturn placements. So I hope you've enjoyed learning all about the Saturn placement, and we've got many more planets to go. So make sure you stick around, like this video, comment, subscribe to the channel, and definitely give it a good old share. And if you've got some questions or things going on in your life that you could use some guidance on for your specific birth chart, go ahead and find me at stormiegrace.com, book an appointment with me, and let's do this. Bye, guys.